My son looked across the holiday table and called me dead weight in front of everyone. For a moment, the room spun, but I steadied myself, letting years of sacrifice hold me upright. Instead of answering his cruelty, I made a quiet decision that would change everything without a single raised voice. That dinner was only the beginning. The storm waiting behind my silence was far greater than they imagined. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I walked into my son's house that Thanksgiving evening with a bowl of sweet potatoes cradled in my arms. The suburban Houston air was cool for late November, crisp enough that my shawl clung close around my shoulders as I stepped inside. The home smelled of roasted turkey sage and butter aromas that always tugged at me, reminding me of the years I had cooked those same meals when Dorian was small. Now he and Valora had taken over the tradition. Their dining room gleamed with polished silverware white candles and a long oak table dressed for 10 guests. I felt the warmth of holiday anticipation as I joined the others. I told myself this would be a night of togetherness, even if I had sensed tensions building in recent months. Still, hope carried me across the threshold. I placed my dish down, adjusted my seat near the end of the table, and smiled as the conversations bubbled around me. Yet beneath that smile lingered a quiet unease, like a draft seeping through a closed window. The meal began pleasantly enough. Laughter rolled between bites of turkey and cranberry sauce, the children of friends darting in and out of the room, while the adults lifted glasses of wine. I sat quietly listening, enjoying the cadence of voices, the clink of forks against plates. Then, like a knife slipping between ribs, Dorian leaned back in his chair, glanced around the table, and said almost casually, "Well, at least Mom isn't weighing us down anymore. No offense, but you've been kind of dead weight." His words cut through the hum of conversation. The room fell silent. Someone coughed to cover the awkward pause. My cheeks flushed, though I didn't let my face crumble. My hands stayed steady on the stem of my glass. I heard the whisper of betrayal in his tone, the arrogance tucked inside his smirk. My own son, who once clung to me during storms, now dismissed me with a phrase better suited for discarded luggage. I wanted to ask him why. Instead, I stayed still, tasting the metallic sting of silence, as if my dignity were balanced on the edge of that table. Valora shifted quickly her voice, lilting in that charming tone she often used in public. "Oh, Dorian, don't say it like that." She cooed, her manicured hand resting lightly on his arm. Then she turned toward me, offering a smile so sweet it soured in my stomach. "What he means, Mother, is that you've done enough for everyone. Now it's your time to rest, to let us handle things." Her words on the surface sounded kind, but the tilt of her chin, the faint amusement flickering in her eyes, told a different story. Around the table, a few guests exchanged glances. One even gave a short, nervous laugh, unsure of whether to side with her or to look away. My skin prickled. Valora's performance disguised her disdain, painting me as someone ready to be packed away into the quiet corners of life. It was the second strike delivered with silk instead of steel, but cutting all the same. I swallowed back the bitterness and glanced at her, seeing the layers of calculation she wore like perfume. My heart sank, but it also sharpened. I raised my glass slowly, catching the reflection of the candlelight in the deep red wine. My voice did not rise because I chose not to give them a show. I simply sipped, letting the silence expand until it pressed against the edges of the room. In that hush, I noticed the curl of satisfaction on Valora's lips, the confident angle of Dorian's shoulders. They believed they had placed me in my corner, quiet and small. What they didn't realize was that silence is not surrender. It is storage. Every word, every look, every smirk I placed inside me, stacking them like firewood. One day that silence would burn. For now I breathed, let the insult settle, and watched them mistake restraint for weakness. The candles flickered, the laughter returned cautiously, and the dinner trudged on. But within me, something shifted. I was no longer simply the mother at the table. I had become the witness, the keeper of their words, the architect of what would come. I swallowed the insult whole, but inside something had begun to burn. The clinking of forks against china carried on like nothing had happened, but my ears were still ringing with the words, "dead weight." Then came something worse. One of the guests, an old neighbor who had known me since Dorian was in high school, suddenly broke out in laughter. It wasn't the kind of laugh that lightens a heavy room. It was sharp-cutting, as if my pain were a private joke shared aloud. Others smirked into their wine glasses, and two women at the far end whispered behind their hands. I felt every pair of eyes glance toward me, and then quickly away, as though I had been branded in front of them all. I sat frozen, my napkin clenched in my lap. My cheeks burned, not just from humiliation, but from the way their laughter rippled through the air and settled into my bones. I had walked into this house hoping to find warmth, and instead I was left standing in the cold, alone at a table crowded with people. The sound of the guest's chuckle replayed in my head like an echo I couldn't shake. The meal resumed, though the flavor of the turkey turned to ash in my mouth. The room had shifted. I could feel it in every stiff smile, every averted gaze. My son carried on as if nothing had happened, his voice booming, filling the air with stories of business ventures and travel plans. Valora leaned toward him with a smile that was all teeth, her hand resting lightly on his wrist. From across the table, I caught the glance they exchanged. It was quick practiced, like a signal between two performers who knew their act had landed perfectly. My silence was their triumph, and they relished it. The guests followed their lead, pushing the conversation forward, pretending not to notice the weight pressing down on me. Every laugh that bubbled up now seemed to carry an undertone. Every polite toast struck me as hollow. I sat in the middle of that polished dining room, a woman measured and dismissed, treated as if I had already drifted into irrelevance. They thought my silence was surrender. They mistook it for weakness. But I felt something else, forming something they couldn't see. Instead of letting the shame consume me, I began to study them. My eyes moved carefully around the table, tracing the curl of Dorian's lip when he bragged about his latest project, the way Valora tilted her head just enough to feign sweetness while her eyes glittered with disdain. I counted the seconds of the awkward pauses, the subtle smirks of the guests, the faint clearing of throats when the tension became too thick to ignore. Every detail imprinted itself in my mind. I wanted to remember it all, not for pity, but for precision. My silence was not empty. It was an inventory. I tucked away each gesture, every cruel laugh, every careless word. I knew I could not confront them tonight. The room belonged to them, and they held the stage. But I also knew this stages can crumble, and masks can slip. A fire had begun to burn inside me during that first insult, and now it spread steady and controlled. They thought I was swallowing humiliation, but I was storing it, transforming it into something stronger. I would not remain their target forever. Dessert arrived, though the sweetness felt bitter on my tongue. Guests leaned back in their chairs, trading compliments about the pie as though the night had been nothing but merry. Their laughter still echoed, faint but lingering like smoke that clings to clothing long after the fire has died. One by one, they began to leave, bundling up against the late November chill. As the door closed behind them, the house grew quiet, but the echoes stayed with me. I stood gathering plates, my hands steady, though my heart felt heavy. Valora hummed softly as she stacked glasses, her tone light, indifferent, as though the evening had passed without a single crack. Dorian disappeared into the living room, already scrolling his phone, detached and satisfied. I said nothing. My silence stretched through the clatter of dishes, through the sweeping of crumbs from the table, through the last dimming of candles. But inside, I was awake in a way I hadn't been for years. I no longer felt like a burden. I felt like a witness gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to act. That fire stayed with me even after the laughter of the guests faded into the night. The first week of December carried a chill that Houston rarely knew. The lawns were damp from an earlier rain, and the Christmas lights that neighbors had hurried to string up glowed faintly in the mist. I had stepped outside to trim the hedges near my porch when I noticed Callan, the neighbor who lived 2 doors down, standing by the sidewalk with his dog. He was a quiet man, not one for idle chatter, yet tonight he lingered as though waiting for me. "Evening, Isolde," he said, lowering his voice after glancing over his shoulder. "You got a minute?" I wiped my gloves on my jacket, sensing something unusual in his tone. "Of course," I replied. He leaned in slightly, speaking low enough that even the night air seemed to hush. "I've heard a few things about your boy Dorian. Word is he's tied up in some property dealings, not the kind you'd want slipping by unnoticed." His words caught me still. I nodded carefully, showing nothing more than mild curiosity, though inside a shiver moved down my spine. Callan wasn't the type to invent gossip. If he spoke, it meant he had seen or heard something real. A few nights later, Callan passed by again while I was checking the mail. He stopped, eyes cautious but steady. "Look, I don't mean to pry," he murmured, but I overheard talk about an apartment complex, something about transferring contracts, changing names on papers. Dorian and that wife of his seemed to be in the middle of it. I steadied my breath fingers pressing against the stack of envelopes in my hand. "Is that so?" I asked, as if it were no more than small talk about the weather. He nodded. "These kinds of deals, well, they can bury people if they're not careful. Just thought you should know." I thanked him with a smile that revealed nothing. Inside, my thoughts raced. An apartment complex, contracts, transfers. Valora's polished smile flashed in my memory, and suddenly her sweet gestures looked more like strategy than affection. That weekend, Valora invited me to a casual coffee gathering with a few extended relatives. The cafe was warm, filled with the smell of cinnamon and espresso. She arrived in her designer coat, hair perfectly styled, laughing too loudly at her own stories. Midway through the conversation, while stirring her latte, she slipped. "When the complex is under our names," she said lightly, almost singing the words, "things will finally be different. We won't have to keep Valora Dorian cut in, sharply placing his hand over hers." His smile was tight, his eyes warning, "Careful." She flushed, covering the moment with a laugh. "Oh, I talk too much, don't I?" she said, sipping her drink as though nothing had happened. But I had heard it. Every word, their names, the complex, a future built on something I wasn't meant to know. Betrayal had a sound, and it was hidden inside her careless tone. I didn't confront them. Not there, not yet. Instead, I smiled politely, finishing my coffee, even offering to pay the bill. They believed my silence was ignorance, that my presence was no more than a shadow at their table. But inside, I was taking notes. Every slip of the tongue, every look exchanged between them, every piece of information that fell from their arrogance became part of a larger picture. My fire burned hotter, not in reckless rage, but in the steady flame of resolve. As I walked home that evening, the Christmas lights flickered across the quiet streets. Dorian and Valora thought they had silenced me, pushed me aside as if my voice carried no weight. They thought invisibility meant weakness. They were wrong. They thought I was invisible, but they had no idea I was already listening. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I sat at my kitchen table with only a lamp casting a pale circle of light. Around me were scattered envelopes, some dated years back, a spiral notebook with frayed edges, and a small pile of sticky notes. My fingers traced old financial statements, not for nostalgia, but for evidence. I had lived my life keeping every receipt, every notice, every slip of paper that proved I had existed, that I had contributed. Tonight, that habit became a weapon. I wrote down names, dates, overheard words, complex, transfer, our names. Each phrase sat heavy in ink on the page. I stared at them until they blurred, then pressed a sticky note against the top corner of the notebook. On it, in letters large enough to silence any doubt, I wrote, "No more." The sting from Thanksgiving had cooled into something sharper. My son's insult was no longer just a wound, it was fuel. They thought I would sit quietly, fading into irrelevance. But I had lived too long, survived too much to be dismissed as dead weight. A few evenings later, I was clipping back the rosebush by my fence when Callan approached. His dog tugged gently on the leash, but he slowed his steps, glancing up and down the street before stopping near me. "I thought about what we spoke of," he said softly. He pulled a business card from his jacket pocket, holding it between two fingers, as though it were contraband. "Marcellus Everett, real estate attorney. Helped my sister with a property dispute years back. He's discreet." I wiped dirt from my gloves and accepted the card without ceremony. The paper was plain embossed only with his name and number. No logos, no flashy promises, just a line of contact, direct and unadorned. "Thank you," I said. My tone was calm, steady, but something inside me shifted. A bridge had formed between knowing and doing. Callan gave a short nod and walked on, leaving me alone with the weight of the card in my palm. I slipped it into my jacket pocket, pressing it against my chest as though I could keep its promise close to my heart. The following afternoon, I found myself seated in a modest office downtown. The walls were lined with framed certificates, not ostentatious, but steady proof of years of practice. Marcellus Everett was a man in his 50s, with kind eyes that missed nothing. He listened without interruption as I recounted what I had overheard the laughter at the dinner table. Callan's whispers about contracts, Valora's careless slip at the cafe. When I finished, he leaned back, tapping the end of his pen against the yellow pad on his desk. "You have more than most people start with," he said. "Now here are your options." His voice carried no drama, just clarity. He spoke of LLC formation, the shell through which property could be acquired. He outlined due diligence checking tax records, identifying delinquencies, assignments of liens. He explained proof of funds and escrow timing each step, building into a roadmap. I nodded slowly, absorbing every detail. Anxiety had accompanied me into that office, but it shrank with each word he spoke. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt not just hurt, but capable. Competence filled the air and I breathed it in. "You're saying," I murmured, "that this can be done quietly?" He met my eyes. "If we're careful, yes, very quietly." The retainer sat before me, a simple sheet of paper awaiting a signature. My hand did not tremble as I signed it. With one stroke of a pen, silence became strategy. Marcellus turned to his computer fingers, moving quickly over the keyboard. Moments later, he slid a printed sheet across the desk. "Preliminary list of distressed assets. One of them matches the address your neighbor mentioned." I studied the page. There it was, bold as daylight. The complex my son and his wife were circling like vultures. Theirs in ambition, but not yet in reality. Marcellus leaned forward, his voice even. "If we move quickly, you could hold the keys before Christmas." I folded the paper once neatly and tucked it into my bag. I didn't make a speech. I didn't need to. I simply nodded once, no more. Dawn striped the kitchen through the blinds. I set my coffee by the tablet and opened Marcellus's overnight email. PDFs lined the screen, tax notices, county assessments, delinquency slips a ledger bleeding red. I zoomed and highlighted phrases, tax delinquent lien, pending notice of default. Each yellow stroke felt like closing a seam that had once split on Thanksgiving night. I pulled a spiral notebook closer. Names, dates, amounts. I wrote what I had heard from Dorian and Valora, their new LLC, the way they said we, as if marriage also granted mercy. At the top of a fresh page, I printed 2 words, "no more." I circled them hard enough to dent the paper. The insult had cooled into something tougher than pain purpose. The kettle clicked. I poured, tasted, and let the bitter sit until it softened. I was 66 and finished asking to be seen. If I was an extra mouth, I would become a sharpened tooth. By mid-morning, I stood on the steps of the Harris County Civil Courthouse, December air bright and mean. People formed a patient line of errands, landlords with folders, shopkeepers in scuffed dress shoes, a woman in scrubs clutching a manila envelope as if it might break or save her life. Inside the line moved in inches. A clerk called next without looking up. When it was my turn, I slid the folder forward. LLC registration, I said. She skimmed the forms, gave a professional nod, and pressed a rubber seal against each page. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Each stamp planted a tent peg in the ground. I live here. I act here. I matter here. She handed the folder back. All set. There was no applause, only the warm heaviness of paper in my hands and the relief of a first step taken without permission. Outside, noon had sharpened the light. I watched a bus sigh to a stop and imagined Dorian's face when he learned mothers could file, sign, and own. Let him discover it from a stranger. Let the news arrive on letterhead, not in my voice. That afternoon, I met Marcellus in his office near downtown. The building was modest brick, a bell that stuck a coffee machine that clicked like an old clock. Certificates crowded the wall. He greeted me with the same quiet competence as last week. I pulled county records first thing he said, sliding a folder across the desk. You should see this. Inside a Proxy LLC registered 2 days ago, formed out of a mailbox suite. The manager's name meant nothing, but the timing did. Dorian and Valora didn't just talk in kitchens, they moved in offices. I let my finger rest on the filing date. The hurt arrived like a wave that had crossed an ocean, late, low, heavy. My own son had placed me on a scale and found me wanting. Now he planned to weigh a building in his favor. I closed the folder gently. Gentleness is power when anger would be easy. They moved fast, Marcellus said, not faster than the law. Then we move first, I answered. He outlined the path again, dovetailing actions to hours, confirm taxes, order a payoff, secure proof of funds, open escrow, file a UCC1 record, the lien, monitor the docket. Verbs clicked like gears. No drama, only sequence. Authorize me to file today, he said. I took a breath like stepping into cold water. Authorized. He called in his assistant. Printers hummed, footsteps went and came. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang 3 times and stopped. Life continued while mine pivoted on a signature. 15 minutes later, he returned with a printout and a small smile. Time-stamped, he said. We're in first position. I looked at the clock, 3:42 p.m., a plain time for a private turning. I imagined paper sliding into a county drawer the way a single sheet can change who must knock and who holds the keys. Thank you, I said. He nodded. It may get noisy on their end. Expect calls. Let me take them. I prefer silence, I replied. It travels farther. On the drive home, the sun fell behind the spaghetti of freeways that make Houston feel endless. Brake lights stitched a red river west. I thought of the clerk's stamps of the woman in scrubs of all the private wars waged on public counters. I thought of Dorian as a baby asleep on my chest in a rented place where the fridge clicked all night. I had counted coins and stretched dinners. No one called me dead weight. My labor was the weight that held us steady. I pulled into my driveway at dusk. Wind chimes tumbled a tired song. In the kitchen, I set the stamped folder in a drawer and slid it shut. Paper feels fragile, but it builds walls just the same. Behind that wood, my lean cooled, drying into consequence. I poured tea and stood at the window while the sky went the color of old pewter. Somewhere, perhaps over dinner, Dorian might be rehearsing a speech about legacy and responsibility words he liked for their shape, not their cost. Perhaps Valora would say, "We again soft as velvet and twice as slippery." I did not plan a counter-speech. The county would speak for me. When the kettle sighed empty, the house settled. I opened my notebook and wrote today's date. Under it, 3 lines: filed LLC, filed lien, first position, filed self-respect. Then I capped the pen and closed the book. By the time they realized the ink on my lien would already be dry. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere far off, thin as a thread. I breathed with it slow and even and let the day fold shut like a file. Be still. Christmas Eve laid a hush over the block as I parked beneath the live oak outside Dorian and Valora's house. My red scarf held the last warmth of my kitchen. The pecan pie on the seat beside me smelled of nutmeg and old lessons. I climbed the walk past a plastic nativity and a wreath the size of a wagon wheel and rang the bell. Valora opened with a smile that kissed the air beside my cheek. "You made it," she said. The house was rosemary and cinnamon children's laughter and cartoon bells from the den. Dorian came in shirt sleeves with a towel on his shoulder, holiday socks peeking above his shoes. He took the pie like it was a delivery and not a memory, then vanished back toward the kitchen. "Glad you're here, Mom," he said over his shoulder. Politeness performed its careful dance coats, hung compliments exchanged. I tucked small gifts under the tree mittens with candy canes tied in twine. When I offered to help, Valora patted my hand. "Just relax. Be our guest." Her tone wrapped velvet around a little stone. Dinner gathered us at a long table set with gold chargers and embroidered napkins. The turkey gleamed. The candles breathed. Dorian raised a glass. To family. To a clean slate. We sipped. Conversation found safe roads, traffic weather, a neighbor's new dog. For a few minutes, I almost believed the room was warm enough to hold us. Then Valora tilted her head and set the knife down neatly. Holidays have a way of showing who carries what she said, voice dipped in sugar. Some people take and never give back. She smiled at the tablecloth as if confiding in linen. Forks paused. A guest rearranged a roll that didn't need rearranging. I placed my hands in my lap to steady the small storm beneath my skin. The children in the den laughed at a snowman song, Innocent Weather on the far horizon. "I'm sure you didn't mean that the way it sounded," a guest said, too bright. Valora reached for cranberries. "Balance matters," she replied. "It isn't fair to carry extra weight forever." The last word hung like tinsel that cuts when you reach for it. I kept my voice folded away. Silence can be shelter when words would only break like thin glass. I sipped water, slow as prayer. Dorian glanced up something unreadable, flickering, and then going dark. Conversation limped forward whether again a podcast someone liked, but the room had shifted by degrees. The candlelight suddenly felt small. I steadied myself with small tasks, pass the rolls, left keep the peas on the top right of the plate, fold the napkin to a triangle. In stillness, I took inventory, the angle of Valora's chin, the quiet satisfaction in her posture, the glance traded by two guests who did not know where to look. Second helpings arrived. Dorian laid the carving knife down and cleared his throat. "Look," he said, "Valora's not wrong. Even the playlist seemed to step back. We have goals. We need efficiency." He wiped his hands, then said the thing like a door closing. "Mom, you've become a burden." The words were soft and heavy, a blanket soaked in cold water. Somewhere a fork touched porcelain and stayed there. My body remembered Saturday bus benches and science fair boards and checks written at midnight. Memory rose like floodwater, and I let it pass. I would not put my history on the table for them to sort like leftovers. "Dorian," someone warned gently. He lifted a palm piece or warning. Valora's fingers circled his wrist. "It's good to be honest," she said, gaze sliding past me. "Honesty is far easier when you aim it over someone's head." I set my fork down so lightly the silver made no sound. "I hear you," I said only that. The simplest truth. No defense, no list. My voice belonged to me again. I took 2 polite bites and set the napkin across the plate as if closing a small book. Dessert appeared from another world, pies of cake dusted like new snow. I poured milk for a child and felt Dorian watching wary now, as if he had expected thunder and gotten weather instead. Laughter returned in the wrong places, skipping like a scratched record. I asked the children about their favorite ornament. Their answers, bright and unfiltered, steadied me like a handrail in a dark stairwell. When leaving was possible without spectacle, I gathered my scarf. In the hall, the children ran for hugs. I knelt, kissed the crowns of their heads, and whispered, "Be kind. That gift lasts." Small arms wrapped my neck with a gravity adults forget. I stood and smoothed my coat. Valora appeared with polished warmth. "Drive safe," she said. "Text when you get home." I nodded. Dorian opened the door, eyes fixed on the hinge. Cold air entered like truth, clean, unadorned. The tree glowed behind them, all glitter and ache. On the porch, I looked back once at the table, a bright island floating in dark water. Then I stepped into the night. My breath climbed into the air like small white ghosts. I reached the car and sat with my hands on the wheel until my heartbeat slowed to something usable. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I let the quiet fill every corner, and in the quiet, I made a space for the part of me they could not touch. As I pulled away, my headlights brushed the plastic nativity, and the molded faces glowed as if alive for a heartbeat. The curve of the street took the house from view. They thought my silence meant surrender, but silence can be sharper than any blade. I went home slow. Christmas morning blinked softly across my living room, the tree throwing quiet beads of light over the rug. I warmed my hands around a chipped mug and opened my laptop. Markellis's name sat at the top of my inbox like a bell that hadn't rung yet. I clicked. Offer accepted. Closing scheduled for Friday, 10 a.m. No exclamation points, no confetti, just the shape of a doorway opening. The house held its breath with me. I read the email twice, then again. I set the mug down, pressed my palm to the table, and whispered a single thank you to God, to time to the part of me that had refused to go quiet the night they called me dead weight. I did not dance. I washed the mug, watered the poinsettia, and fed the birds on the back porch. Joy at my age travels lower and deeper. The lights on the tree blinked like steady breathing. I folded the scarf I'd worn to Christmas Eve and put it away. A line from Marcellus's email kept echoing, "You moved first." On Friday, downtown wore its holiday hush. The title office felt like a library on the last afternoon of summer, almost empty, lit by long rectangles of winter sun. A receptionist slid a stack of papers across polished wood. Marcellus sat to my left, pen-poised glasses low on his nose. "We'll go page by page," he said, calm as a metronome. Name of buyer, Willow Bay Holdings, LLC. Authorized signatory, Isolde Marrow. I signed where a yellow flag told me to sign printed, where a blue one told me to print. Wire confirmed. Taxes apportioned. Transfer recorded. The notary's stamp sounded like a soft gavel. My hand stayed steady. This was not a miracle arriving from a cloud. It was a set of choices, each one small, all of them mine. Marcellus gathered the pages and straightened them into a neat block, a simple act that felt ceremonial. "Congratulations," he said not loudly. We shook hands in a quiet, respectful way. In the elevator down, we spoke of practical next steps, insurance, binder, lock audit, tenant notices, timed for the first business day of the new year. My reflection in the elevator's stainless steel looked like a woman I was finally willing to recognize. The parking lot was half full, holidays carving gaps between cars. A man in a navy jacket approached with an envelope and tired shoulders. "I'm Ramon," he said, "property manager." We shook hands. He handed me a clipboard, then an oval brass tag on a ring heavy with teeth of different ages. Boiler room, laundry, 2B, office. His palm pressed the weight into mine like a baton. "Keys, codes, gate remotes," he said. "Welcome, Ms. Marrow." There was no trumpet, no camera, only metal in my hand and the sudden gravity of control. Somewhere deep in the building, a dryer hummed and a child banged a ball against a door. "We'll keep things quiet for now," I said. Ramon nodded, understanding the kind of quiet I meant. We walked the grounds. Cracked paint at the rails, a gutter flooding a bed, the faint smell of bleach and onions. Ownership is not a trophy. It is stewardship. People sleep behind these doors, stack bills on these counters, wash socks in humming machines. If I wield power, it will look like repairs and rules that apply to everyone. So Ramon noted a unit that needed a new fridge, another with a soft patch in the floor by the sink. I took photographs as promises to myself. Upstairs, a landing looked toward the skyline. Houston lifted its squares and glass in the distance, indifferent and generous. I could feel Dorian's certainty here, the way he had pictured owning these corridors, the little tyrannies of a small kingdom. I closed my fist around the keys until the ring bit into my palm, not to hurt, but to remember. At dusk, I returned alone. The courtyard was blue with evening. I moved through the hallways without hurry, counting steps, tracing routes to the boiler, the breaker panels, the roof hatch. I learned the building by noticing what it repeats. A tenant waved from a mailbox and went back to sorting letters. No one asked who I was. Power moves quietly. Inside the empty office, I opened the bottom drawer of the desk. Lease files rested in manila jackets, their corners softened by years. I slid my nameplate from my coat pocket and did not put it on the desk. Not yet. Let the paper speak, first notices, schedules, repairs. Let the building feel change as maintenance that arrives. Bulbs replace the week they burn out. I locked the office and stepped into the evening again. The sky over the freeway flickered with early fireworks from some impatient yard. I put my hand in my coat pocket and felt the ring of keys settle against the lining. For a second, they were warm, as if they had a pulse. On the drive home, the radio played a carol I used to hum while Dorian slept in his car seat, his mouth open, trusting the world to hold. I turned the volume low and let memory ride shotgun. Pain can be a compass, not a home. At my kitchen table, I drew a grid for the first week of January locksmith at 8 a.m. safety lighting audit by noon letters cued for certified mail. At the top, I wrote, "We will be fair, firm, and quiet." Under it, I added a second line, smaller for myself alone, and "We will not forget." Before the New Year's fireworks lit the sky, the keys were already heavy in my coat pocket. I spent the last morning of the year at my dining table with the blinds drawn halfway, the winter sun striping the wood like ruled paper. The laptop hummed, the kettle clicked off, and Marcellus's email slid into view. Draft notices, proposed dates, statutory language, and a reminder that clarity is kindness. I read each line as if it were a promise I would have to keep. Amounts timelines, appeal instructions, maintenance schedules, no surprises, no traps. I printed the packets and stacked them with a ruler's edge. Rent adjustments would roll out in tiers phased over months with allowances for seniors and verifiable hardship. A building is only as decent as the person who owns it. I underlined that in my notebook and breathed through the weight of it. Somewhere a neighbor's wind chime tapped the air. I signed the authorization, attached it as a PDF, and clicked send. The cursor became a spinning wheel, then a check mark. By late afternoon, I was at the complex office, a room that smelled of toner and lemon cleaner. Ramon set 2 boxes of envelopes on the desk and pointed to a fresh stack of certified mail slips. "We'll start with January's batch," he said, tapping the top box. "Stairwells and mail slots before dark certified copies tomorrow. Questions will come. They should, I answered. We'll answer them. The letters tell the truth." He nodded, then showed me the route sheet the porters would follow and the log where we would record deliveries that couldn't be made. The work felt procedural, almost municipal. Not vengeance, not spectacle, just policy meeting calendar. Still, I felt the shift like weather. The building had been holding its breath. Now it exhaled into a different shape. We walked a circuit together, the laundry room where a lone washer rattled a beat, the courtyard where a bicycle lay on its side, the stairwell where a bulb stuttered and then steadied. I made a note to replace the whole run with LEDs after the holiday. People notice when the light changes. At dusk, fireworks began testing the sky over Houston, small blooms popping along the horizon like knuckles. I drove home with the radio low and the letters language repeating in my mind. Adjustment, effective, grace period. My phone buzzed on the console. Marcellus. 2 updates, he said. First, the mail house confirmed tomorrow's certified batch. Second, I'm hearing through a clerk that a proxy filing connected to Dorian and Valora hit resistance. Your lien is in the way exactly as designed. They don't have a clean path. I pictured the look that would cross Dorian's face when the message reached him. Not rage, but surprise at the existence of a boundary. So they can't proceed. They can try to maneuver, he said, but they'll be forced to acknowledge you. Paperwork does that to people who thought they could step around you. Enjoy your evening, Ms. Marrow. After the call, I sat with the phone in my lap and listened to the neighborhood warm up to midnight. A dog barked. A child squealed at sparks. I poured tea and watched steam thread the air like a small flag no one else could see. Vindication at my age has fewer fireworks. It settles in the muscles, not the throat. I felt it settle, mingled with a sober understanding that every decision I had made would touch people who had never spoken my name. I thought of Valora's smile at Thanksgiving, the way she held a knife as if it could point. I thought of my son's sentence, the one that chose a smaller story for me than the truth could hold. A mother either accepts the role they write for her or writes in the margins until the page belongs to her again. I had chosen the margins and then bought the book. The television scrolled muted celebrations from Times Square while Houston put up its own light. I opened my notebook and listed the January repairs again, locks, handrails, the boiler gasket that groans in cold weather. If I could make the building safer and more honest, then the letters would be part of a whole, not a cudgel. I want to be the kind of owner who remembers names and fixes broken things. I also want to be the woman who stopped letting her son decide what she was worth. At 11:59, I turned off the TV and stood at the window. Fireworks stitched color above the dark line of roofs. My reflection looked back at me with the new steadiness I had earned. The first cluster exploded white, then gold. I raised my cup as if I were toasting someone who couldn't see me. The phone buzzed with a final text from Marcellus Clerk. Confirms your record indexed. Sleep easy. I smiled at the phrase and turned it into a prayer for the night. Let the record stand. Let the paper stay true. Outside, a chorus of cheers swept the street and then thinned to separate voices. I washed the cup, blew out the candle, and let the house go quiet. I did not make resolutions. I made a list for the morning. My future would not depend on a wish. The envelopes were packed and labeled, the routes assigned, the certified slips ready to be stamped. I set my alarm and laid out my jacket. The steadiness of preparation is a comfort no one can take. When midnight finally softened, I stood in the doorway and felt the cool air move across the threshold. The year had turned. I was still here, older, not smaller. That mattered. Yes. By the time the year began, the rent letters were already on their way, an omen they never saw coming. The first ring came while I was buttering toast. Winter light combed the blinds into pale bars, and the house felt as hushed as a library. Ramon's name flashed on my phone. I wiped my hands and answered on speaker. "Morning, Ms. Marrow," he said, voice tight. "Heads up, the tenants are calling Dorian. A couple got his cell from an old flyer. They're asking why their rent just jumped." I pulled my notebook close. "Protocol," I said. "No names. Direct every question to the portal. Log every call, every timestamp, every request." He exhaled. "Got it." I drew a box on the page and labeled it January Intake. By 10, the phones in our world were a drumline. One tenant left a voicemail about the letter. A second texted Ramon a screenshot with my LLC circled in yellow. A third asked whether late fees would be waived during the changeover. I answered Ramon's emails in simple sentences the way you write directions on a map. Yes, the grace period stands. Yes, work orders continue. No payments do not go to Dorian's brand. The word brand made my jaw tighten. Housing is not a logo. Housing is heat in January and a lock that turns. Around noon, another vibration cut across the counterpoint. Dorian. My phone stacked his name one atop another like a deck of cards you don't want to play. I did not answer. He left the first voicemail clipped and confident, promising to handle the error and sort out this clerical mix-up. The second had a hitch. "Mom, there's chatter," he said, forcing a laugh too thin to hold. "Tenants are forwarding something that says there's a new owner. That can't be right." By the third, his breath rode the words like a passenger on a bus he didn't mean to catch. "Call me," he said lower now. "Call me back." Ramon subscribed me to a transcript service so I wouldn't have to replay the audio. On paper, the progression was even starker denial, bravado, then the small whine of panic. When one tenant quoted the certified notice, "We will follow this instruction," his facade cracked. I drew a check mark in the margin. Sometimes you don't need words to remember. Sometimes ink is enough. At dusk, a different tactic arrived. Valora's email mass blasted to a list they should not have kept opened with a banner in winter blue. Important disregard any unsanctioned rent change. Below her copy lilted as if she were emceeing a gala. Dear residents, she wrote, we are aware of confusing letters. Please continue paying your usual amount to our leasing brand while we correct misinformation. Misinformation. I let the word sit like a stone in the throat. Then I forwarded the email to Ramon and to Marcellus without comment. The less I said, the clearer it would be. Ramon moved fast. Within minutes, the resident portal displayed a notice in clear type. Effective January 2nd, management is changed. Payments must be made per the instructions in the certified letter. Failure to do so may incur late charges. Questions, use the portal. He pasted the new owner's LLC and office hours below. Marcellus replied, all with a polite cease and desist, addressed to Valora's sender, citing interference and potential consumer confusion. No heat, no adjectives. The law does not need to shout to be heard. The replies told their own story. A teacher thanked the office for the clarity. A retiree asked if her senior discount would continue and received a yes before she finished her tea. A young couple uploaded a photo of their certified slip, like proof that the ground beneath them had not moved without notice. In the thread's middle, Dorian chimed in from a personal email, trying to pull the conversation offline. No one bit. The center of gravity had shifted. He was not the middle of this circle anymore. After dinner, I drove by the complex and idled at the curb. The office window held a fresh sheet of interim signage with my LLC neatly typed. In the courtyard, a father in a knit cap carried groceries while a child trotted to keep up a paper crown from a birthday party tilting on his head. 2 tenants came down the stairs carrying envelopes, talking in the unguarded tone strangers use when they share a hallway and a problem. I kept my headlights low and my hands at 10 and 2. No one looked at the woman in the sedan. That was the point. A wind kicked up and the portal banner mirrored on my phone, bright against the dusk. I thought of the word owner and how it had been used like a weapon by men who wanted to impress other men. Ownership in my hands felt like stewardship. It felt like a list of repairs you dog-ear and a promise you make to strangers to keep them warm. You can change a building without breaking it. You can correct a son without raising your voice. The kettle clicked off at home in my mind, an old habit of watching heat and time. Back at the house, the evening thinned into quiet. I brewed tea, wrote tomorrow's tasks on an index card, and laid my pen on top like a paperweight. The phone pulsed again. Dorian. Then again. And again. I powered it down, set it face down on the counter, and listened to the kettle begin to whisper for real. Outside, a siren faded. Somewhere a neighbor's dog barked twice and gave up. I rinsed my cup and turned off the light over the sink. By nightfall, Dorian wasn't calling tenants anymore, he was calling me. I let the phone keep ringing. I arrived 5 minutes early and chose the last row, the chair with a wobble that made you sit lightly. Fluorescent lights flattened the room into beige folding chairs, a dented podium with a missing screw, a coffee urn breathing out the thin smell of supermarket blend. I kept my scarf on, opened a small notebook, and let my hands be still. Dorian stood at the front palms planted on the podium. Valora moved through the aisles with a sign-in sheet, smiling with all her teeth. "We appreciate you coming, Dorian," began voice-pitched in that bright managerial tone people use when selling confidence. "There's been some confusion about letters. We're here to clear that up." Chairs scraped. Tenants settled, a nurse in scrubs, a retiree in a ball cap, a mother bouncing a baby to a private rhythm. Ramon, our property manager, waited by the wall near the bulletin board with a neutral folder tucked under his arm. He met my eye, then looked away. A young man lifted his phone. "The rent is going up in February. Is that you or not?" His screen glowed with the portal banner. A murmur moved through the rows. Dorian smiled too wide. "Those notices are a mistake," he said. "Some misinformation slipped through. Keep paying what you've always paid to our brand while we resolve the clerical issue. Misinformation from certified mail, the nurse asked. She spoke evenly, not combative, just tired of being told not to trust what she could hold in her hand. Another tenant raised an envelope with the green card still stapled. "This isn't a flyer," he said. "It's a letter with an LLC and a new office address." Valora stepped in, palms out. "Please don't worry. This is a season of change for everyone. We're simply asking for patience." The mother bounced her baby higher. "Patience won't pay the bill," she said. The room hummed. The temperature of belief was shifting. "Okay." Dorian said, the brightness dimming a notch. "Let me be clear. Ignore any portal updates. They're not authorized." Ramon cleared his throat. "Per policy," he said quietly, "payment instructions must match the active management agreement. Show us the agreement," someone called from the middle. Heads turned. The retiree in the ball cap leaned forward on his cane. "Yeah," he said. "If you're in charge, show us." Dorian's jaw worked. His eyes flicked to Valora. She gave him a look that said, "Keep going." He lifted a slim folder and flipped a page. Ramon stepped forward, the neutral folder now in both hands. "If I may," he said to the room, not to Dorian. No one objected. He pulled out a printed statement on letterhead and read steady voice. "Effective January 1st, the complex is under new management acting on behalf of the Recorded Owners LLC. Rent adjustments reflected in certified notices are valid. Payments must route via the updated portal. Correspondence instructing tenants to disregard notices is unauthorized." He posted the language and signed it as manager. Silence opened like a door. It closed on Dorian. A woman near the aisle whispered, "So who are we paying?" Ramon pointed to the banner on the young man's phone. "That entity." He slid the statement into a clear sleeve and pinned it to the corkboard. The pushpin made a soft, decisive sound. In the hum of the vents and the thin coffee smell, the room seemed to settle around facts, not volume. I had no need to speak. Silence carried on. Color climbed Dorian's neck. "You can't just," he started, then stopped, when two tenants held up their phones recording. Valora's smile thinned. "Let's not turn this into a spectacle," she said, the PR voice gaining an edge. The nurse folded her arms. "We just want to know who's telling the truth. The truth," Dorian said, voice cracking on the word, "is that my team has run this place for years." He swept a hand toward the windows. "There are complexities you don't understand." The retiree shook his head. "Bills aren't complex. Dates aren't complex." He tapped his cane. "Proof is not complex." A tenant near the back raised his lease packet. "The portal shows a different pay-to-name," he said. "If we follow yours and it's wrong, are you covering late fees?" Dorian blinked. Valora touched his elbow. "We'll take questions offline," she said quickly. But the room had found its voice, and it wasn't hers. Ramon kept his even keel. "Per the agreement," he said, "service requests and payments are centralized. If you have hardship concerns, we can discuss them at the office." He nodded toward the posted statement. "The process is written here." He didn't glance at me. He didn't need to. The meeting wobbled on its legs. Some tenants stood to leave, satisfied enough to wait for rent day. Others filmed the bulletin board and the statement capturing the letterhead. Dorian tried for one more push. "I will have my lawyers contact the owner," he announced. "This will be corrected." Ramon even said, "Please do." Valora started collecting the sign-in sheet, her smile now thin. She whispered to Dorian. He swallowed, adjusted his tie, and looked across the rows, as if searching for a friend. I closed my notebook. The paper made a small sound. Ramon glanced at the clock and then at the room. "If there are no further questions," he said, "we'll conclude. Before we do." He cleared his throat and faced the back row. "The owner is present." Chairs creaked as heads turned. I rose. I did not rush the first step. The aisle between folding chairs felt narrow, the linoleum catching the click of my heels like a metronome. Ramon moved aside without show, one hand on the dented podium. I set my notebook down and let the room see a woman who had run out of apologies. Phones lifted. A baby hiccuped and went quiet. Dorian stared as if the seating chart of his life had been switched. Valora touched her necklace and missed. "Good evening," I said. The word landed small and steady. I opened a plain manila folder. Paper slid to the podium with the soft sound of a page turning. "My name is Isolde. I am the managing member of the LLC posted on your portal. As of January 1st, I am the recorded owner of this property." I laid out the deed copy, the certificate of formation, the management agreement already cited tonight. Names, dates, stamps the cool grammar of authority. The room did not cheer. It exhaled. A tenant in scrubs leaned forward. Ramon taped a summary on the corkboard. "Translations available," he said. A polite murmur moved through the back row. Valora's phone lit her face. Dorian's color drained like paper held to a window. "No," he said softly, as if the word could rewind a month. "This is a stunt." I met the room without blinking. "The notices stand," I said. "Maintenance and hardship questions go to management. Payment instructions remain as written. Listening hours will be posted this week." Dorian stepped so fast the podium shivered. "You manipulated this," he said, pointing at me. "Not the papers. You created a crisis to make me look incompetent. You used the holidays, Mom." The last word frayed. Valora reached for his sleeve. He shook her off. I let the silence serve him as echo. "I won't argue with you," I said. "Tonight is for clarity, not spectacle." A man in a ball cap lifted his lease packet. "She bought a building to run it right," he said. A few people nodded. One clap stopped, then started again, small but stubborn. "Show them the part where you doubled the rent," Dorian demanded. Adjustments were noticed according to statute, I answered. Appeals and phased options exist. Documented hardship will be reviewed. In return, we will fix what you have asked for: stairs, lighting, pest control, drainage. Control comes with duty. I accepted both. Relief moved across faces like a low tide. Valora tried for poise. "Tenants, please remember this is a family dispute." The nurse shook her head. "I don't live in your family," she said, voice steady. Questions followed. Portal access office hours. Pest control dates. Ramon answered with calm detail. The room began to function a machine after a belt is replaced. Dorian stood in the static where authority had been. "You always wanted to embarrass me," he said quieter. I remembered him at 6, angry at the knot he tied. "I wanted you to grow," I said. "Growth doesn't come from pretending." 2 phones caught the tremor in his jaw. He closed his mouth on whatever he had planned to throw. I thanked the tenants for patience. "Please route everything through management," I said. "Do not email or call Dorian or Valora about the property." No one argued. People stood, photographed the board, gathered children and work bags. At the door, the nurse touched my sleeve. "South stairwell lights," she asked. 3 by Friday, I said. Her smile set a small light inside me. Outside the community room, the winter air had the silver edge of foil. Breath hung like quiet ribbons. Behind me, Dorian spoke to the floor. "You could have told me?" I turned. "You could have asked me not to be dead weight," I said. "I did not lace it with poison." I said it as if peeling a label off a jar. Valora lifted her purse. "We'll see you in court," she said, voice thin. Ramon didn't look up from the bulletin board. Procedures continued, unimpressed by threats with nowhere useful to land. I picked up my notebook. Someone had found a missing screw and tightened a wobbling chair while we argued. Some repairs happened at the edge of the noise. I faced the room one last time. "Thank you for coming," I said. "Drive safely." Tenants filed out a procession of lives that were never about our family drama, and never will be. The door sighed. The old ache settled lower in my body weight I could carry without bending. The manager asked for order once more and read a short statement into the room, his voice even as a level. He referenced the agreement on letterhead and the updated portal banner, then pinned a copy beside the evacuation map. A few tenants film not for spectacle, but for the comfort of having proof later when memory blurs under stress. A teenager in a hoodie whispered to his mother, and she nodded relief and caution braided together. No one shouted. The authority was procedural, not theatrical, and that steadied the air more than any speech I could have given. Valora typed again the way people do when they know the room has moved on without them, and words will not fetch it back. I stood there long enough to feel the shape of the moment. It wasn't triumph. It was alignment, like a door finally hung square in its frame. I thought of the holidays and of the word that had tried to stick to me at a table dressed in silver and pine: dead weight. The body remembers what it has lifted. The mind remembers who tried to make it small. I would not be small. I would be exact. When I finally turned toward the exit, the hinge didn't creak. Things moved as they should. For the first time in years, I didn't need to raise my voice. My silence had already spoken louder than his fury. The winter sun slanted through the blinds in Marcellus's office, turning the gold frames around his diplomas into strips of light. He leaned back in his chair, glasses low on his nose, and read aloud from an email Dorian's so-called lawyer had sent overnight. The words were loud in the quiet room: threats of lawsuits, accusations of fraud, promises of public humiliation. Each line dripped with desperation, dressed up as authority. I set my folder on the table without a word. Inside were the receipts of their own undoing copies of every cease and desist letter. Marcellus had filed time-stamped logs from the tenant portal statements, signed by tenants who had forwarded Valora's emails in disbelief. Facts had a way of shining brighter than threats. Marcellus tapped the folder, once a gesture of approval. "We don't need to fight this in court," he said evenly. "We'll mediate. They don't have the stomach for real exposure." For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt my shoulders lower, not because the fight was over, but because the path was clear. Their noise couldn't touch me if I stayed rooted in proof, in what once felt like betrayal now served as fuel. The mediation room smelled faintly of coffee and copy paper. A carafe of water sat at the center of the table, condensation slipping down its sides. The mediator introduced himself. Voice calm, hands folded. Dorian launched first, as I expected, loud, righteous, painting himself as a son betrayed by a scheming mother. Valora followed smoother words chosen like glass beads, polished but fragile. I didn't interrupt. Marcellus slid documents across the table one by one: contracts, management agreements, portal screenshots, even a printed transcript of tenant complaints. He read dates, signatures, and clauses until the air shifted. The mediator leaned back, removed his glasses, and gave Dorian a look that no mother could mistake: 1 part pity, 2 parts disappointment. Twist by twist, their performance cracked. Valora's pen stilled on her notepad. Dorian's shoulders stiffened as if bracing for impact. The mediator's tone sharpened, not cruel but decisive. Given the documentation presented, continuing litigation would expose you both to significant liability. His words cut more cleanly than any insult Dorian had ever thrown at me. The boy who once called me dead weight blinked at the weight of paper stacked against him. By late afternoon, the conference room was quieter pens, scratching over paper instead of voices shouting. The settlement terms were read aloud. Dorian and Valora would withdraw any claims to ownership or management of the apartment complex. They would reimburse my legal fees. They would issue no further statements to tenants or third parties. An NDA sealed their silence as neatly as an envelope. When the mediator asked if I agreed, I simply nodded. Then I added one clause of my own authorization for the property manager to post 3 notices: a hardship review window for seniors facing the rent increase, a lighting upgrade schedule for every hallway, and mold remediation for 2 long-neglected units. The signatures came quickly after that. Dorian scrawled his name in angry strokes. Valora's hand trembled as she pressed hers onto the page. The folder closed contracts tucked away, and in that simple act, the shape of my power changed. This was no longer about beating them. It was about proving I could use silence to build, not just defend. Outside the conference room, the city hummed in late afternoon traffic. I walked through the noise-untouched settlement papers in my bag. Ownership had never been about vengeance. It was about stewardship, about ensuring a roof held steady even when the beams were tested. That evening, dusk painted the Houston sky in soft pink as I sat on my front porch with a mug of tea. My phone buzzed with a short message from Dorian. "I'll respect the agreement." No apology, no warmth, just compliance. It was enough. When I checked the mailbox, another envelope waited. Inside was a folded sheet of paper covered in crayons, my grandchild's careful drawing of a tall building with glowing yellow windows. The windows shone brighter than they had in real life. Beneath the picture, a single word spelled in shaky letters, "Grandma." I pressed the page against my chest, then sent a short text to the property manager, "Make the hallways brighter than that." The sky deepened, the street quieted, and I let the silence belong to me. For the first time in months, it wasn't heavy. It was strong. A roof beam settling into place. He once called me dead weight. Turns out I was the beam holding the roof. Tonight, the house stands quiet and finally mine. When I look back, I realize silence was never weakness. It was strength waiting for the right moment. I learned that respect is not handed to us. Sometimes we must claim it quietly with steady hands and proof in our pockets. Family can wound us, but those wounds don't define us. What defines us is how we rise, how we hold steady, and how we turn pain into purpose. And now I want to ask you, what would you have done if your own child called you a burden? Would you stay silent, or would you find your own way to stand taller? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear where you're watching from. If this story touched your heart, press 1 in the comments, or tell me which state or city you're tuning in from. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because sometimes the quietest voices hold the strongest lessons.